Alright, we're gonna continue today. We will continue with Alexander the Great. Do you still remember something about Alexander? Anything that you can still remember about Alexander the Great? If you don't remember, you can also tell me and I can revise.
He conquered Greece.
Yes.
And he was fearless.
Nice. Okay, so to speak about anyone, we need first to identify his place of birth and his parents also. So, for example, he was born in Macedonia. And Macedonia is to be considered at the north part of the Greek city-states like Athens, Thebes, and Sparta. His father was Philip II, and his father, he was the king of Macedonia. As a king, he had that vision of uniting all of the Greek city-states under his control. Why that? Why did he want to just get all of the Greek city-states under his control? Because they share a common heritage and they share common views. Okay, he himself, Philip II, lived and was born in the city-state of Thebes. Consequently, because he shares the Greek origin, so he needs to have control of all of the city-states of the Greek civilization and connecting them all under just one control. Of course, in his conquest, his son Alexander, he also had some new visions of his own. He started taking some of his closest friends and his army and started to invade tribes, villages to the north and connecting them to his father's new empire. But in his sister's wedding, father Philip II unfortunately was assassinated, and after his assassination, Alexander's mother, his name was Olympia. So his mother tried to urge Alexander to have control of his father's empire. So far, so good. That's what we have already taken last Thursday. So, about today, we'll speak about how Alexander started to conquer Persia. Salman, can you read, please?
From where, sorry, teacher?
Yes. Alexander conquers Persia.
Where, teacher?
Alexander
was only 20 years old, yet he was already an expired soldier who shared his father's ambitions with Greece, conquer Persia by 334 BC. He had enough ships to cross the Dardanelles, the strait skirting Europe from Asia Minor.
Okay, thank you very much. So simply, even though that Alexander was very, very young, only he was at the age of 20 when his father was assassinated, yet he had that dream of his father, and he had also his ambition, which is connecting all the Greek city-states together and invading our forever and lasting enemy, which is the Persian one, with the Greece subdued, meaning that the standby or the connection, he began organizing the forces needed to conquer Persia. So, by the year 334 BC, he had enough ships to cross the Dardanelles, the strait, parting Europe from Asia Minor. So Dardanelles means, highlight that or underline, they are the strait separating Europe from Asia Minor.
Teacher, your screen is not changing.
Can you see it, Abdurrahman?
Yes.
So he started to use the Athenian ships in order to cross the Dardanelles and to get to the Persian Empire. Persia itself was no longer the great power, if you can remember. It was no longer the great power it had once been. The Emperor Darius III, Darius III, he became an aging empire. Okay, the empire itself becoming an aging one, like the Chinese civilization when we studied them. So Darius the First was very, very strong. His son Xerxes was very, very, very strong. After that, Darius the Second came and power started to slip from his hand. But later, Darius the Third came and he was very, very weak, which allowed other people to have this advantage and to start taking control of the Persian Empire. So Darius the First was very weak, and the provinces were often in rebellion against him. Provinces are the villages beyond from or far from the capital of his empire. So provinces were often in rebellion against him. Still, the Persian Empire stretched for more than 2,000 miles from Egypt to India. All of that was still under his control, yet he was weak to rule them. Alexander won his first victory against the Persian at Granicus River. He then moved from the victory to victory, marching through Asia Minor into Palestine and South Egypt before turning against to take Babylon in 331. Other cities followed, but before Alexander could capture Darius, the Persian emperor was murdered. So once again, we can see that another assassin was to be happened. The first one was Philip the second, and now Darius the third himself was assassinated. So this map in front of you shows you the way that Alexander left Macedonia and started his journey to conquer the Persian Empire. So from Macedonia, he started to move to Granicus River, and from Granicus River he went to Asia Minor, and from Asia Minor he took Palestine, and then he moved towards Egypt. From Egypt he liberated all of it from the Persian conquer, and later went back to the Babylonian Empire. From the Mesopotamian civilization he started moving towards the Persian Empire itself and their own lands. And later, after doing all of this and conquering all of these lands, Darius himself was assassinated and killed. So, later he started, after conquering the Persian Empire, he had that strange dream. So now I have conquered all of that place. Why not going into India? Let's conquer India also. And that was actually the unstudied decision that he had made in his life. Rahman, can you read?
Yes, okay. But teacher, again, can't see your screen. It's not changing. Yes.
Now,
Yes,
okay,
now we can see it. I read the march into India.
yes.
Okay, with much of the Persian Empire under his control, the restless Alexander headed further east. He crossed the Hindu Kush into northern India. There, in 326 BC, his troops for the first time faced soldiers mounted on war elephants. Although Alexander never lost a battle, his soldiers were tired of the long campaign and refused to go further east. Reluctantly, Alexander agreed to turn back. After a long and difficult march, they reached Babylon, where Alexander began planning a new campaign.
So, simply, Alexander, he himself has never lost a battle in his life. So, just imagine winning a battle after battle, connecting all the city-states together for the first time, especially in the Greek civilization, having advantage of conquering Asia Minor and then Babylon and later Egyptian civilization, and going to the Persian into their home. Come on, what are you speaking about? Of course, the man had such an ego. He was, yeah, he had. Feel he felt that he was superior to all of these men. His ego was in the sky, especially that some tales were told about him that his birth was a divine one of the goddess. He was a semi-god, something like that, and gods and goddesses bless him. Remember, they are what polytheistics, so they believed in all of this. So, because he never lost a battle, he just needed to continue. Okay, let's win battle after battle. So, for the first time, he started to move further east into India. But his soldier, for the first time in their life, mounted soldiers on elephant that are used in war elephant. Of course, they were astonished. How can we fight them? So, our techniques, our phalanx technique, our new technique, our archery, all of this will not be sufficient to stop those soldiers on the war elephant. Consequently, we need a new method. The soldiers also just imagine the journey, guys. So they fought and fought and fought until they reached Persia. Come on, it's very difficult and they need tourists. So they just refused to continue the campaign into India and went back to rest in Babylon. In Babylon, Alexander started to just explain and started to plan for a new campaign. Okay, because now put your in your mind, he was very talented in planning for war, yet he had such an ego. That ego played very bad for him. Later, the early death of Alexander. Ryan, can you read?
Me, teacher.
Yes.
Okay. The early death of Alexander. Before he could set out again, the 32-year-old fell victim to a sudden fever. As Alexander lay dying, his commanders asked to whom he left his eminence empire. To the strongest, he is said to have whispered. No one, no one leader proved strong enough to succeed. Alexander, instead, after years of disorder, three generals divided up the empire. Macedonian and Greek went to one general, Egypt to another, and the most of Persia to a third. For the next 300 years, their descendants competed for power over the lands of Alexander had conquered.
Thank you very much, Ryan. So, unfortunately, nothing lasts forever. So, Alexander himself came to counter death in a very, very young age, at the age of 32. He fell a victim to a sudden fever. Some say that this fever was due to some insect that bit him while trying to invade India. Because you know that India is in the tropical area and they have a lot of forests and some animals living there. So some say that one of the insects inside that forest bit Alexander and caused him a severe disease. That disease led him to have a very sudden fever, and they could not help to save him. While dying, his commander asked him, "To whom shall you live? Shall you leave your eminence empire? Who is gonna rule us?" So he just said, "To the strongest." But unfortunately, none of them was strong enough, or not even having the power to collect all of the people and gather all of the people that were with Alexander. So imagine that one of your teachers, he's a very good teacher, so you all like him. Consequently, you all listen to his session, you attend with a regular, but another teacher is not so talented. So this teacher will not have your full attention. So if the better one is to leave your class and another one will succeed him, you will never treat him in the same way. Yeah? And that same thing happened with Alexander. Once he died, no one was to be treated like Alexander the Great. Okay, that's why later they started to just divide his vast empire, Macedonia and Greek, to one of his generals, Egypt alone to another one, and most of Persia to a third one. And for the next 300, they started to just fight between themselves in order to have power over some land of those which Alexander has already conquered. And again, the that's the plane that shows how Alexander started his conquest from Macedonia into Asia Minor to Egypt, Babylon, and later to invade most of the Persian Empire. Any questions so far?
No.
Once again, any questions so far?
No.
All right. So we'll continue to speak about Alexander's legacy and what is the legacy that was left for us by Alexander. Although that Alexander's empire soon crumbled following his premature death, yet he had unleashed changes that would ripple across the Mediterranean world and also the Middle East for centuries. His most lasting achievement was the spread of the Greek culture. So he took the ideas, the culture, and everything from Greek and started to spread them all over the world. About the cultural blend. So if you can remember, as we have said million of times, that once you come to a place, you do not just come with arms, you don't come just with merchandise, you don't come just with goods, yet you bring with yourself culture, and also ideas. So now we have a Greek men from Macedonia started to move into Asia Minor, Egypt, Babylon, and Persia. So of course, along with them, they brought their own culture. So across his far-flung empire, Alexander founded many new cities, most of them named after him. The generals who succeeded him founded still more, meaning that they made even more cities. Greek soldiers, traders, and artisans settled these new cities from Egypt to the border of India. They built Greek temples, filled them with Greek statues, and also held athletic conquest as they had increased. Local people assimilated, meaning that absorbed, taken in. They assimilated Greek ideas. In turn, Greek settlers adapted local customs. So simply, you are Saudi. If you went right now to live in the UK, you will get blended with the people in UK. You will be absorbed by their culture, and you will soon start acting like them, right? And that's exactly what happened. So the Greek people who came with Alexander from Macedonia and Greek city-states, they started to make some cities and started to settle down in those cities. And they started to practice their daily life and started to spread their ideas and culture. Consequently, the people started to be absorbed in that civilization, and time by time, they just started to blend and shuffle unless everything became clear and they all lived in harmony. Alexander later had encouraged a blending of Eastern and Western culture when he had married a Persian woman and urged his soldiers to follow his example. Meaning that because we are Greeks, we feel superior to other civilizations, yet let's blend with them. Why not blending with them? So, as a Greek, I married a Persian woman. So you do the same. Marry an Egyptian, marry a Mesopotamian, marry someone from Asia Minor, from Thebes, from Greek, from Persia, from India. Just marry and come blend together. All of us, after all, are humans, and we must blend in order to share common views and have a blood bond. He had also adapted many Persian customs, including Persian dress. Gradually, after his death, a vital new culture emerged that blended Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and even Indian influences. This Hellenistic civilization would flourish for several centuries. So, a new civilization emerged after the act of Alexander, Hellenistic civilization. It was a mixture between most of the world civilization by them. So far, so good.
Yes.
Any question, guys?
No, thank you, teacher. Teacher, can I go to the bathroom, please?
Okay, you can go. So Alexandria in Egypt, the cultural capital. So as Alexander himself started to construct some cities, he constructed the city of Alexandria in Egypt, and Alexandria became the cultural capital, became one of the most important and fascinating cities back then at that era. At the very heart of the Hellenistic world stood the city of Alexandria in Egypt, of course, located on the sea, lanes between Europe and Asia. Its markets hosted a wide range of goods, from Greek marble to Arabian spices to Eastern African ivory. A Greek architect had drawn up plans for the city, which would become home to almost a million people. Among the city's marvelous sights was the Pharos, an enormous lighthouse that soared 440 feet into the air. And of course, Alexandria Lighthouse was considered one of the old seven wonders in the world. The lighthouse was one of the old seven wonders. Alexander himself and his successors encouraged the work of scholars. The ruler of Alexandria built the great museum as a center of learning. The museum hosted laboratories, lectures, halls, and also a zoo. Its library had thousands of scrolls representing the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world. Unfortunately, the library was later destroyed in a fire, and most of the books were lost. Yet later, a new one had replaced it. So, one of the most important influences that Alexander had left for us was building the city of Alexandria. And Alexandria, still up till this day, is called the White Sea Pride. The White Sea Pride. It's in Egypt and it's marvelous, it's expanding, and it's still a very important city. It has access to the Mediterranean Sea, and also the people living are in it are very good ones. Women take new rules. What about women? Did they still, as the Athenian people treated them, or they were like the Spartan women? Or what was the rule for women at that time? Paintings, statues, and also local codes show that women were no longer restricted. Women were no longer restricted to their homes during the Hellenistic period. More women learned to read and write. Some even became philosophers or poets. Royal women held considerable power, working alongside thousands and sons, husbands and sons, who were the actual rulers. In Egypt, for example, the able and the clever queen Cleopatra the Seventh became the ruler of in her or came to rule in her own rights. So women were no longer just treated as inferior or as less powerful or less worthy than men. Yet they were treated in a very high and respectful place, and even Cleopatra became the queen of Egypt. So she ruled alone, like Hatshepsut, if you can remember from the first semester. Any questions so far, guys?
No.
Teacher,
Yes?
I have a question, but it's not in lesson.
For anything.
The 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 project. Do I present it or not?
Yes, you will have to present it starting from tomorrow. Starting from tomorrow till Thursday, you will start presenting your project so that I can give you the full mark. Anyone, anyone that will not present the project or deliver it to me will be deducted marks starting from tomorrow until Thursday, and no further delay will be accepted. Okay,
Okay, okay. Thank you, teacher.
you are very welcome. So, if I asked you, how did Alexander encourage the blending of culture? What can we say about that? How did Alexander encourage the blending of cultures? In
Because
what?
teacher, he
Yes.
built Greek temples in Egypt and India.
Nice. What else? There is one act that he did shows how he meant to blend cultures, which is put this in your mind. There is nothing more stronger to blend a
When he
culture
married the
than
Persian
marriage.
woman.
Exactly. So, uh, even in the old days, when they tried to form alliances, they just would get married. So, if I'm from a city state and you are from a city state, and I have a son and you have a daughter, or vice versa, and we need to make an alliance between our both city states, so my son will marry your daughter, or my daughter will marry your son, and by the blood bond, we can encourage the blending of. So now we have become one, because my blood has become your blood. And by that, Alexander started to encourage blending, which is by marrying a Persian woman, and even encouraging his men to do the same and follow his steps. In the Hellenistic period, we will speak also about the arts and the science. But let's just try a quick video about.
In 336 BC, Alexander the Great ascended the Macedonian throne, and under his rule the cities of mainland Greece united in a pan-Hellenic campaign against the Persians. The gradual breakup of the Persian Empire, the conquest of all countries as far as the deserts of Africa in the south, and the Jaxartes and Indus rivers in the east, and the transplantation of Greek culture to the outermost margins of the then known world, indisputably marked the beginning of a new era. It would become known as the Hellenistic Age, and would be limited conventionally to the period between 323 BC, the year of Alexander's death in Babylon, and 31 BC, when Augustus achieved supremacy. During this period, the Hellenic world expanded, stretching from the western Mediterranean, where its old colonies continued to flourish, to the borders of India, and from the Crimea to the edges of Arabia, Nubia, and the Sahara. The division of this vast geographic area into kingdoms, outcome of the conflicts that broke out between the successors to Alexander, did not prevent the creation of a common cultural expression throughout the eastern Mediterranean, which was manifest in both art and language. The Greeks, with the freedom of the cosmopolitan, lived on equal terms with the local populations in Pergamum, Antioch, and Alexandria, to name just the most significant centers of the time. They exerted influence and assimilated influences. They recognized in foreign gods archetypes of their own, and either identified them with members of the Greek pantheon, or interwove the new tradition with the old, in what would now be termed religious syncretism. Save for the warring democratic coalitions of the cities in mainland Greece, the monarchy imposed by the Macedonians inevitably limited citizens' involvement in public affairs, and through the creation of a wealthy urban aristocracy, presented personal advancement as a new social value. The monarchist ideology sought luxury, and the East was able to offer gold and semi-precious stones in abundance. Hellenistic art expresses passion, the abysmal, the sublime, as Carafi the Alexandrian would teach us thousands of years later. The shift towards individualism into the realism of the portrait, the depiction of aged flesh and marginal occupations, something that was inconceivable to the idealizing mind of the classical period.
Okay. No, there are no pages for the project, Abdullah. You can just make the project from the help of the internet or something, but you must do it yourself. Okay, no plagiarism. So do not just copy paste. You have to make it yourself, and you will present and show us that you understood what you have already summarized. So, regarding to the Hellenistic art and the science, we will just speak about the new topic. So, the cities of the Hellenistic world employed armies of architects and artists. Temples, palaces, and other public buildings were much larger and grander than the building of the classical Greeks. The elaborate new style reflected the desire of Hellenistic rule to glorify themselves as godlikes. So, simply because now they are living in a very more better place and in a very wide one. Of course, comparing the size of the Macedonian place to that of the city of Alexandria, for example, or other cities that were made by Alexander and his companion, we will find out that those new cities are far more larger than the Greek cities. Consequently, they will acquire larger temples, larger houses, larger palaces, and because all of that, they started seeing themselves as superior to other people from the Greek or any other people were invaded by Alexander himself. And even the philosophy started to emerge into those cities. For example, political turmoil during the Hellenistic Age contributed to the rise of new schools of philosophy. The most influential one was Stoicism. Its founder, Zeno, urged the people to avoid desire and disappointment by accepting calmly whatever life brought. It's like Confucianism, actually. So, one of the most important schools in philosophy was the Stoicism school by Zeno, and he just needed people to accept whatever their fate might be, calmly without any disturbance. Stoics also preached high moral standards, such as the idea of protecting the rights of fellow human. You are human, I'm human, we must protect ourselves. They taught that all people, including women and slaves, taught unequal in society, were morally equal because all had the power of reason. Stoicism later influenced many Roman and Christian thinkers. So they believed in equality between men and women. We all share common views, we all have the same ideas, so we all can become philosophers. There is no need for us to be superior to another. Correct, grade 9?
Okay.
Any questions so far?
No, thank you.
All right. If you have no questions, you are welcome to read.
Thank you.
You are very welcome. See you tomorrow.